نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم أنكم تكذبون فلولا إذا بلغت الحلقوم وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون ونحن أقرب إليه منكم ولكن لا تبصرون فلولا إن كنتم غير مدينين ترجعونها إن كنتم صادقين فأما إن كان من المقربين فروح وريحان وجنة نعيم وأما إن كان من أصحاب اليمين فسلام لك من أصحاب اليمين وأما إن كان من المكذبين الضالين فنزل من حميم وتصلية جحيم إن هذا لهو حق اليقين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة
wabarakatuh. Inshallah, I would like to welcome you all again to our another lecture, and inshallah iftar together after with salat before iftar in the title of the lecture's Divine Promises. Inshallah, to start off our program, I would like to welcome our dear brother Ali Hamdani for some recitation from the Holy Quran. Please help me welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك صوت عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Hassan, brother, inshallah, another loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Once again, I would like to, inshallah, welcome you all to another one of our lectures for the Divine Promises. Inshallah, just a few announcements before we begin. Inshallah, we will continue tomorrow's program with a lecture with Shaykh. Also, we're going to have iftar together. If you haven't RSVP'd for the for tomorrow's iftar, we ask you to please do that so we can make sure we have you here, and inshallah, we would love to have everybody here. Inshallah, please stay tuned to our WhatsApp and social media channels for any updates and upcoming events. And most importantly, we do want to let everybody know there is, we love and we welcome all of our children here. So if the children do need a little bit more room to let off some running around or do what they need to do, what kids usually do, inshallah, the gym is open. There is a space in the gym where you could take them down there, join them, accompany them, and make sure you're with them to make sure they're safe. But when they're ready to come back up, inshallah, you could bring them up. So that's just a reminder, inshallah. And then most importantly, if you haven't RSVP'd tonight for the iftar, after Salat, we welcome everybody to join us, inshallah, as we could break bread together. Inshallah, we're going to play a short video, and after that, inshallah, we'll welcome, directly after that, Shaykh Usama will join us. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اليوم بدنا نقول لكل هؤلاء، لأمريكا، إسرائيل والإنجليز اللي هن أشطر شيء بهول اللعب، وأدواتهم من دول إقليمية في منطقتنا. نريد أن نقول لكل عدو ولكل صديق، وهذا هو الحقيقة التي عمدت بالدم، مش كلام أنا عم بحكيه على المنابر، هذه حقيقة عمدت بالدم. اليوم بيوم القدس، آخر جمعة من شهر رمضان المبارك 2013 ميلادي، نحن شيعة علي بن أبي طالب في العالم لن نتخلى عن فلسطين ولا عن شعب فلسطين ولا عن مقدسات الأمة في فلسطين. قولوا رافضة، قولوا لا مش لايك، لا قولوا، قولوا رافضة، قولوا إرهابيين، قولوا مجرمين. قولوا ما شئتم، قولوا ما شئتم، واقتلونا تحت كل حجر ومدر، واقتلونا تحت كل حجر ومدر، وفي كل جبهة وعلى باب كل حسينية ومسجد. نحن شيعة علي بن أبي طالب لن نترك فلسطين. ونحن حزب الله، من بين هؤلاء نحن الذين تربينا في مشروع المقاومة، كنا صغارا فتيانا شبيبة، على هذا وعينا وعلى هذا كبرنا وعلى هذا تربينا وعلى هذا نمينا. المواجهة مع المشروع الإسرائيلي والدفاع عن هذه الأمة والدفاع عن فلسطين والقدس والمقدسات وعن لبنان وشعب لبنان وكرامة لبنان وسيادة لبنان هو أمر اختلط بلحمنا ودمنا وعروقنا وورثناه عن آبائنا وأجدادنا وورثناه لأولادنا ولأحفادنا. وعلى هذا الطريق قدمنا آلاف الشهداء وخيرة الشهداء من السيد عباس إلى الشيخ راغب إلى الحج عماد. قدمنا فلذات أكبادنا وأعزائنا شهداء. ولذلك أختم في يوم القدس لأقول لكل العالم: نحن حزب الله، نحن حزب الله أيضا سنتحمل مسؤولياتنا بمقدار ما علينا من مسؤوليات. ونحن حزب الله الحزب الإسلامي الشيعي الإمامي الاثنى عشري. لن نتخلى عن فلسطين، لن نتخلى عن القدس، لن نتخلى عن شعب فلسطين، ولن نتخلى عن مقدسات هذه الأمة. رحم الله إمامنا الخميني، نصركم الله جميعا، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين، روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So dear brothers and sisters in Islam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I hope everybody's doing well. Tonight, brothers and sisters, is the third portion of our discussion on the divine promises, those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised to give to the believers. Now, what I'd like to do tonight is for us to have basically three takeaways from this discussion. We'll see how many of Allah's promises we're able to cover tonight, but inshallah, if we can do them with three takeaways in mind. Those three takeaways, the first one and the most important one, is the encouragement for all of us when we hear these discussions, when we look at the ayat of the Quran together. First of all, for introspection, because we're not here to point fingers, what is somebody else doing? We're looking inward. Am I a mu'min? So the first one would be that encouragement for all of us, starting with myself, to become Quranic mu'mineen. Right? Because to be a mu'min according to Quran is different from many times the way that we were taught, the way that it's shared. That's different from what the Quran says is a mu'min. The second takeaway that I'm hoping that we take, especially the two and maybe if we're able to three promises of Allah that we're able to cover tonight, would be hopefully when we go over the real life examples, perhaps we get a greater appreciation for the leader himself. As you know, the person who we are benefiting from is the leader. He's the one who's now we have that book and we're all going through the book together. But he also is an embodiment of these same promises that he's teaching us. He's going to show us the ayat of the Quran. We're going to pause. We will go through the ayat of the Quran together so that we're learning. But then after that, we can also acknowledge our teacher, the one who's the embodiment of these promises. Perhaps instead of us only trying to get ourselves ready for the 12th Imam, we'll remember and feel more grateful to the person who is helping us get there. And then the third takeaway is tonight I want to do it a little differently. So normally what I've been doing is to first discuss the promises, those gifts that Allah has for us, if we are truly mu'mineen according to Quran, and then afterwards take one portion of that important lesson, selective duty, and address certain parts that have been plaguing the ummah, reasons why up until now we are not, as an ummah, many times truly mu'mineen in the Quranic sense. Tonight, because of the importance of the subject, I'd like to share first one dimension of Quranic faith, one practical way for us to start moving towards that Quranic faith, and then after that move back towards those promises, inshallah. But we'll start with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the things that I personally am very grateful for, the tawfiq that we have, is that we have so many young children in our audience, that Allah has given us the tawfiq to try and do it right, and that these young children, those mothers who will take the time, I know it's difficult, but will bring their children. Even some of you may have to take a break from the actual lecture. You have to go downstairs, spend a little bit of time downstairs, and then bring the children back so that in 7 years they're able to sit through a majlis. But that time that you're putting in, Allah sees. And it's so important because, brothers and sisters, by going over the ayat of the Quran together, we can break the curse. There are so many people who are good people, mu'mineen, but because they're unfamiliar with Islam as it is taught by Quran and Sunnah, the same good people end up being part of the reason that the Imam's not here. So, having said that, we're going to go over one of the definitions of Islam. We're working towards that Quranic Iman, that elusive third condition. We're going to work towards that. But what happens is we get a chance to do it right by introducing, first to ourselves, then to our children, Islam as is, from the beginning. Now, let's look at some of the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt. So when the Imam, this is now Amirul Mu'mineen, he describes Islam, we're going to see from his definition part of that elusive third trait. So true Quranic faith has three parts. One part of it is intellectual conviction, that I'm personally certain that Allah is my Lord, that the Quran is His book, intellectual conviction. Then after that, the idea that my faith not be mental acrobatics, but rather be action-producing faith. But then the third part, which is elusive and difficult, is the part where I can't pick and choose. Islam is a package. It only works when it's a package. Let's say you and I, we didn't mention Quds. We didn't talk about Quds. That would be so much easier. But vegetarian Islam, Islam light, Islam without mentioning that we have to go against the Zalimeen, is that the Islam of Imam Mahdi? Will that bring back the Mahdi? No. So that willing surrender is something that we're going to see now. We're going to look at some of the ahadith from Ahlul Bayt before we go over the ayah of Quran. So the first hadith is from Amirul Mu'mineen, and he says, Al-Islam huwa taslim. Islam is surrender, willing surrender, turning myself over to God, absolute trust in God. Al-Islam huwa taslim. What happens though is the way that Allah wants it is that it's our hearts, our minds, and our bodies that submit. Intellectual conviction, but then the heart has to submit. Sometimes, brothers and sisters, the heart is that last stronghold that hasn't submitted. It's some part of Allah's religion that it hasn't embraced. This is now part of the solution. The Imam says, this is from Imam Sadiq, Al-qalbu haramullah. The heart is the sanctuary of God. It's the haram of Allah. He says, فَلَا تُسْكِنْ haram Allah غَيْرَ Allah. Never allow other than Allah to reside in His shrine. So we see this is a battle for the heart. What happens, brothers and sisters, is that Quranic faith, which is going to produce those miracles. And I want to give some real life examples from the life of Imam Khomeini so we can see that, no, this isn't just something that's discussed in books. No, there's videos about, we can look at this happening. We're seeing it happening right now. One of the things we have to remember, because I said it's the heart, the mind, and the body that submits to God. God doesn't like attitude. Allah doesn't like to see that someone would dare in their heart to not have submitted. We have a beautiful hadith where our prophet from the past, Nabi Musa, is walking. Brothers and sisters, some of you are new, so I end up walking a bit during the lecture. I also share the ayat of the Quran, and I allow the audience a few minutes so that we find the ayat, and then we read them together. Because you're not here to be fired up. You're here to learn, and then after that to share with others. So, a story now. This story is again about the idea that the heart belongs to God. God doesn't like attitude. He wants submission. So the story is from the time of Nabi Musa. Nabi Musa, brothers and sisters, was walking, and he saw a man. And this man was in a state of sajda. Sajda. The hadith says, Nabi Musa went past the man, and this man is praying, begging Allah, acting out, worship. I mean, what better than sajda? He was there so long that Nabi Musa went, took care of whatever task he had, came back, and he sees the man is still in a state of sajda. Nabi Musa said this, if your hajah, if whatever it is you are begging Allah for, if that was in my hands, I would have given it to you. He was so overwhelmed with this. Then God revealed to Nabi Musa, again, God doesn't like attitude. He told Nabi Musa this, Ya Musa, O Musa, law sajada, if this man makes sajda, hatta yanqati'a unuqo, he makes sajda till his neck snaps, ma qabilathu min, I will not accept from him. What is it that God's looking for? Outward acts of worship? Submission. He says, hatta yatahawwal, until he changes, mim amma akra ila ma uhib. He changes from that which I dislike to that which I love. So God wants to see submission. Submission what? Of just the outer self, grudging obedience to God? No. In order for Quranic Iman to take place, the heart needs to fully submit to God. So now, brothers and sisters, we're going to take one of the verses of the Quran. I'd like to share the verse so that you can read it with me, and you'll see exactly, because we're going to go over it slowly. We'll look at the Arabic of it, and we'll see where it is that God is saying the heart has to submit. The heart can't have a problem. If the heart has a problem, it's not Quranic Iman. So this verse, brothers and sisters, is from Surah 4. So Surah Nisa, Surah 4, and then verse number 65. Surah 4, verse number 65. Let's see if I've quoted it correctly. So, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Let's see if everybody found it. Do you guys see that on 464? Fala wa rabbik. Sisters? Fala wa, okay. So, God is swearing by himself, right? By the way, every time we read an ayat of Quran, we get the thawab of doing khatam of the Quran, right? So there's one verse of the Quran, all right? So God says this, Fala wa rabbik. He swears by himself. So no, by your Lord, la yu'minun. They do not believe. They don't have Quranic Iman. La yu'minun. Until what? Hatta yuhakkimuka fima shajara bainahum. Until, if there is a dispute amongst them, they make you, the Prophet, to be a judge. Yuhakkimuka fima shajara bainahum. There's a dispute. And then the believer should be this way. Not what I want. Not what you want. Whatever Allah wants. They make you as the judge. But then after that, Allah doesn't just stop there. Because this is also about the heart of the believer, not just righteous actions, not just grudging obedience. Allah continues. He says, then, la yajidu, they do not find, fi anfusihim, in their heart of hearts, in their selves, harajan mimma qadayt, any sort of difficulty or haraj with what you've decided. So it's not that I'm outwardly, grudgingly obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in my heart of hearts, I've still got a problem. God says, no, that's not acceptable. Because He said, فَلَا وَرَبِّ, He says, لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, they do not believe. He says, until what? So He continues, وَيُسَلِّمُ تَسْلِيمًا. And then these people submit a thorough submitting. So the heart has to be completely at peace with God, in love with God, trusting of God. This happens when we get, and this next verse is also going to be about Iman. Right? Another verse about Iman, the Quranic Iman. Quranic Iman, that full and absolute trust of God, comes when someone loves God more than anything else. This one, brothers and sisters, you should see in Surah Baqarah, so Surah number 2, verse number 165, but this one will be part of a verse. So it should be 165. Let's see if you can find the same part of the verse that I'm referring to. What happens is now again the heart of the believer, and the idea that the believer loves God and then trusts God. Okay? So 165, part of it should be this. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Do y'all see that in the verse? Y'all see that? Sisters? Okay. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believe, أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. They are more passionate and in love with God. So somebody who's fully in love with God, has complete trust in God, that person is able to fully submit to Him. I want to give you a practical example. Maybe some of you have seen, when you want to test how much trust you have for someone, maybe some of you have seen this experiment that some people will do. Be like, if you really, really trust this person, then they're going to stand behind you and they're going to catch you, fall straight back. Okay? Now, imagine hopefully you have full trust in me and you're going to fall straight back. You're going to fall, you'll collapse, right? If there's full trust, you fall straight back. If there's not full trust, you're like me, you kind of catch yourself. I don't know, maybe the Shaykh might let me go. Right? When it comes to God, can it be full trust in God? The idea that God's good. If I do it His way, I'm going to share the hadith. If I do it His way, He'll make me win. I serve a good God. So then I'm able to fall back fully and just trust in Allah, as the ayat of the Quran says. What the hadith tells us is part of the reason that we can't fall fully in love with God, can't trust Him when it seems difficult, is because in our heart of hearts, there are still some spiritual diseases with God. The hadith is going to mention three situations where the mu'min or mu'mina should be brave, but is not able to be brave. And the reason is lack of trust in God. So the Imam says this in this particular hadith. Innal bukhla, so truly being stingy. Wal jubn, so sometimes I should give in the way of Allah. I'm not able to, I'm stingy. Bukhl. Another time, I should be able to be brave. Like Imam Ali says, ash-shaja'a sa'. Right? Just takes one moment, being brave, being uncomfortable, doing the right thing, but I'm not able to. He says hirs, where sometimes I'm greedy, I'm nervous, I'm worried. He says all of these things go back to one thing. He says they are gharizatun wahida, so they're one trait, yajma'uha su'udhan billah. They're one trait, all of these situations. So one situation, the mu'min should be brave. The mu'min is not able to be brave. One situation, the mu'min should give. Mu'min shouldn't be worried, shouldn't be greedy. Where do all of these come from? The Imam says they all come back from that relationship to God and not being able to trust Him, to be able to fall back into God's hands and know that God will catch me. So now, the other thing though that we want to keep in mind is this. Because there is sometimes a temptation to misbehave when others around me are misbehaving. So there's one time when we live amongst malaika. You and I, we live amongst all of the angels. Everybody's a great mu'min. Everybody does their responsibility. Another time we live amongst believers like ourselves. You're telling me to trust God, to do my part. But on the other side, I'm seeing other human beings who aren't doing their part. There is a temptation to misbehave also. The Imam addresses that. The Imam tells us this, that if we as believers, because you and I, we believe Allah controls the universe. He's fair. He's good. You do your part. He'll do his. The temptation to misbehave, God is warning us through the words of the Ahlul Bayt that it makes it worse for us. Hadith now from the Imam. The Imam says this, Man hawala amran bima'siyatillah. The person who tries to achieve something, to accomplish something, bima'siyatillah, by disobeying Allah. He says, Kana afwat lima yarju. The same thing that I was hoping for, praying for. I'm now further from that. It's more possible that it escapes me. Wa asra li maji'i ma yahdhar. And maybe the thing that I'm hoping for actually, or that I'm so afraid of, that actually will come now quicker. So misbehaving doesn't make sense because Allah controls the universe. With believers, He's transparent. Sometimes when believers disobey, the same thing the believer was trying to escape from, God will bring that on the believer. So, having said that, one example, and then after that we'll start to move to some of Allah's promises for the believer. So let's recap. Quranic faith, one part of it, was the idea that God doesn't just want to see us on the outside obeying, but rather the hearts. The hearts have to embrace all of Islam, willingly, not grudgingly, right? Otherwise, if I have, even in my heart of hearts, a problem with it, then God swore by himself, and he said the person didn't believe. One example from Ahlul Bayt, and after that, some of these promises of God. Willing surrender. Absolute trust in God. What better example than Karbala? In Karbala, if you remember, brothers and sisters, the Imam moved from Medina to Mecca. In Mecca, the Imam got word that the authorities were coming after him. They wanted to shed his holy blood in Mecca. The Imam didn't want that to happen. The Imam decided to move and to go towards Iraq. When the Imam decided to go towards Iraq, then one of his relatives came and told the Imam, he was like, look, Iraq right now, are you sure? He insisted so much that the Imam said, I'll think about it. I'll wait till tomorrow and then I'll decide. The next day came. When the next day came, they see that again Imam Hussein is proceeding and he's about to leave. So the man stops the Imam. He says, but didn't you promise that you would think about it? Willing submission to God. The Imam said this. He said that I saw the Prophet in a dream, and the Prophet told me. He said, Inna Allah qad sha'a an yaraka qatila. God wants to see you martyred. The man was so upset, he started crying. He said, but what about the women and children? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And then again the Imam spoke. Again that willing surrender. He said, Inna Allah qad sha'a an yarahunna sabaya. God wants to see them captured. The daughters of the Prophet, Allah wants to see them as prisoners. Absolute surrender. Absolute, there's nothing in this for me. It's all God. Not what I want, not what you want. That willing surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now some of the promises and some real life examples. First, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, if Allah gives tawfiq, we might be able to discuss 3 of the promises of God today for the believers. One of them that Allah wants us to have, A gift for the believers is the gift of guidance, to know our direction, to know what we're supposed to do. There are many people in this world who are confused, who don't know how to tackle situations, who don't know what the direction they should take is, but Allah has promised guidance. And you'll see in the verses of the Quran, Allah becomes your teacher. Allah becomes your teacher. Now, when Allah becomes your teacher, let me just say this as a bit of clarification, because I remember back in the day when I was in Qom, some of these spiritual gurus would use some of these same ayat of the Quran to try to negate us doing our practical responsibility. So let me share first one of the verses of the Quran as reassurance, and after that the point from the guru, and then the real life example. Don't learn from the guru though. We're learning from the ayat of the Quran. Okay. One of them, Surah Baqarah, brothers and sisters. So if you can turn to Surah Baqarah. Well, actually, before you turn to Surah Baqarah, first turn to Surah 10. Let's see if I've quoted this verse correctly. First turn to Surah 10 and verse number 9. I believe it's Surah Hud. Let's see if I got it right. But it might be 11. So let's see if I got it right. Is Surah Hud 11 or 10, brothers and sisters? 11. Turn to verse number 9. See if I've quoted this verse correctly. Do you guys see this in the Quran? Do you see إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ? No? Y'all don't see that? It is Surah 10. Yunus. Okay, my bad. Sorry. I'm fasting out here. All right, let's go back again. Sorry. So it is, I thought I made a mistake with the quote. Okay, so 10, Surah 10, and verse number 9, 10:9. Let's see if you see the same verse. Inna alladhina. You guys see that? 10:9? Okay. Truly those, inna alladhina amanu. So truly those who believe, those who have Quranic Iman, wa amilu salihat, and do good deeds. What does God give these true mu'mineen? Yahdihim rabbuhum bi-imanihim. God will guide them because of their faith. God will guide. And the leader in the book, if you remember, he explained, it doesn't mean that from the very beginning we'll know every step of the way for a 100-mile journey. Rather, the example he gave us was that of being in a desert, of being able to see a little bit in front of you, acting on that guidance, and then God showing you more, right? So it doesn't mean that when we say God guides, that I'll know no, I'll know what my current responsibility is. If I act on that, God will provide me with more guidance. Next one. The next one is the verse that the gurus used to use. We're going to use it in the right way, though. So Surah Baqarah, this is just the last part of the verse. So turn to Surah Baqarah, turn to verse number 282. 282. Go down to the bottom of the page, and you should see this line. The line says this: Ittaqullah wa yu'allimukumullah. Do you guys see that? Y'all see that? Okay, good. Ittaqullah, so have taqwa of Allah, be wary of God. What will God do for you? Wa yu'allimukumullah. God will teach you. God will teach you. He'll show you what you need to do. So what this does not mean is that we cast aside studying and learning and doing those kind of responsibilities. No, we do those responsibilities. We apply everything we have. But sometimes you need God to show you what you're supposed to do, to bring the facts for you, to connect the dots for you to be able to see. So with the gurus, they would take people away from your protection. What is your protection, brothers and sisters? Following the law of the Sharia. With the gurus, one of their first thing was let's go to the batin. Let's go beyond, right? Why are you worrying about the outside? With us, it's working on the outside of the Sharia, submitting, wajibat, right? Social, political responsibilities, all of Islam, following a marja, and then Allah teaches you. Right? Ittaqullah wa yu'allimukumullah. So now one example of that. Well, Well, actually, let me give you another promise of God, then the story will have both, inshallah. Okay, another promise of God. So the first promise of God was guidance, that God would serve as our teacher. He would show us. There would be things that would be hidden from us. But because we're applying ourselves, God would connect the dots. The second one that God gives us, I'm going to share the ayat of the Quran with you, is God will also give you nur. Nur. Nur they translate as light. I'm going to call it clarity. You can look at the discussion of the leader. What happens is sometimes you have that gift of the intellect. You have the ability, but sometimes things cloud your vision. It can be diseases of the soul. It can be ignorance. It can be ta'assub. It can be many things that cloud our vision. We need clarity. And God provides clarity to the mu'mineen. Okay, so now some verses of the Quran about this, and then after that, we'll move on to the real life story, and then hopefully that other promise of God. So, this one, brothers and sisters, if you can turn to surah number 57, we'll read the ayat of the Quran together. Right? Surah 57 and verse number 28. So let's see if I got this one right. 57, 28. 57:28. Allah is speaking. He says, so let's see if I got it correct. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. You guys have that? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So it's talking about faith. Oh, you who believe. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Ittaqullah. Have taqwa. Right? Be God-wary. Be God-fearing. Do your responsibility. Sense God's presence. Ittaqullah. What else? He says, وَآمِنُوا بِرَسُولِهِ. And then believe in his messenger. Mu'mineen, taqwa, and then after that, believe in the messenger. What will God do for you? يُؤْتِكُمْ كِفْلَيْنِ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ. God will give you 2 shares of his mercy, and this is the nur part. وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ نُورًا تَمْشُونَ بِهِ. And God will grant you nur, that clarity, tamshuna bih. You'll walk with that light of God. Right? It's a promise of Allah. And then also he continues, he says, وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ. God will forgive you. وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And Allah is forgiving. Okay. Another verse of the Quran, again, where Allah talks about nur. Again, these are not just 1 or 2 verses of the Quran, but just so we get a couple of examples, and after that, move on. This one now, everybody should have memorized. This one will be Surah Baqarah and verse number 257. Surah Baqarah 257. Let's see over here what God again says about the believers. So, do you guys have Allah waliyul ladhina amanu? Yes? Okay. Allah wali. God is the waliyul ladhina amanu. God is the guardian of those who believe. What does God do for the believers? يُخْرِجُهُمْ. He removes them. مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ. From those various types of darkness. إِلَى النُّورِ. God brings them from darkness to light. God gets clarity for the believers. Now, one real example. This one, for those of you who speak Farsi, you can see this, or you can read up on it. It's an example from the life of Imam Khomeini. But the other example that I'd like to give you is one from our more recent shuhada. Because the idea is, you and I, we hear about this. Yes, the leader has these at the highest level. But the idea is you and I can also enjoy these promises of God here. One of the beautiful hadith is this. It says, ittaqu firasat al-mu'min. Beware of the intuition of the believer. Firasatul mu'min فَإِنَّهُ يَنْظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ. This believer sees with the light of God. So this now is a real example, and after that, the story from Al-Khomeini. One of our more recent shuhada. So, some of our shuhada went to Syria to defend the shrine, right? So we heard all about the 8-year war, but there were some people who more recently went to Syria to defend the shrine. Some of these individuals came from various Islamic countries because they came together to defend the shrine. One of these individuals is from Afghanistan. Now what happens is, shahada in Islam is a spiritual process that the person goes through. They live like a shaheed. They stay away from sin. They keep begging Allah, purifying themselves. Finally, if Allah sees they're worthy, He grants it to them. This particular shaheed, and his name is Shaheed Murtaza Ghafuri. Murtaza Ghafuri. He became aware he was going to become a shaheed before he became shaheed. And he made a video of himself, and you can see him talking to his parents because he's realized. Remember, God guides clarity, and he realizes before he becomes a shaheed, and he makes a video, and he's going to talk to his parents for the last time, make sure the video remains of him. Now, one story from Imam Khomeini. Imam Khomeini was explaining a situation where one time he was in Najaf. So Imam Khomeini is in exile. The Munafiqeen Khalq, right, Munafiqeen, who later went over and waged so much war. I'm going to talk about them in the second example, if I remember, if I get a chance. These people, initially, they were called Mujahideen Khalq. Mujahideen, for the people, right? And they were introducing an ideology. And these individuals, on the outside, were very Islamic. But they had fooled even certain ulama. Imam Khomeini, when he tells this story, he says, I'm in Najaf, I'm in exile now, and ulama had written me, Imam Khomeini, please, you need to go over and to show your support, sign off on the Mujahideen. These young men, you have no idea how good they are, how great they are. So Imam Khomeini said they came to see him. When they came to see him, the Imam says, Imam Khomeini says, they came and they're talking, and he said they only talked using Nahju Balagha and Quran. And he said, I gave them permission. I said, say everything you had to say. Imam Khomeini said this took over 20 days. Imam Khomeini in the video, he says maybe 24 days, but it was over 20 days. They would have one session with Imam Khomeini for an hour and a half, 7 sessions, explaining, and everything they're doing is talking about Quran and Hadith. So many ulama were fooled, and Imam Khomeini is sitting and he's listening to these young men and how expert they are in ayat and hadith and going back and forth and how Islamic they are. He said, I remembered a story, Imam Khomeini says. He says that I remembered about one of our ulama in the past, Ayatollah Abdul-Majid Al-Hamadani. He said, I remembered this story. When I see how much mastery they have of the Quran, he says, I remember this story. He says, once a Jewish person became a Muslim in Hamadan. But he really became a Muslim. Like as in he had become a Muslim yesterday, but now he was so holy and so pious and so spiritual that Ayatollah Hamadani, Sayyid Abdul Majid, he said, I got a little suspicious. This holy, this pious? He said, I told him, I want to talk to you. Come see me. So the man came to see the Ayatollah. And he said, do you know who I am? He said, yeah, you're Ayatollah Abdul Majid Al-Hamadani. He said, so can you tell me, what about my forefathers? Do you know? He said, no, I know that you are one of the children of the Prophet. Your lineage goes back to the Prophet. He said, fine, tell me about yourself. He said, well, I was born Jewish ethnically, but I became Muslim. He said, the Ayatollah then asked him, he said, so tell me, what's your secret? I am a Sayyid. I'm one of the children of the Prophet. I spent my whole life studying this stuff, ayat, hadith, killing myself, spiritual journey. How is it that you, who just became Muslim yesterday, are even more holy and spiritual than I am? And then the spy, when he saw that, then he just realized he'd been caught and he left. So Imam Khomeini said, I remember that story. These young men, they come in left, right, up and down, fooled all these ulama. And Imam Khomeini said that I didn't say anything to them until they got to one point where they said that we want to do an armed uprising. They needed to get the Grand Ayatollah to sign off so they can get the masses of the Shia. We need to do an armed uprising. And Imam Khomeini said, that was the one time he spoke back. He said, no, I don't believe in armed uprising. That's wrong. You shouldn't do that. Because Imam Khomeini believed in awakening the masses, doing it the hard way, convincing people, working with them, hearts and minds, the clarification jihad. That's what Imam Khomeini believed in. So he said, no. He said, but when I went through, and he said they brought all of their books and all these things. He said, I read all of it. And Imam Khomeini said, I could sense from reading their material, they don't believe in the akhirah. Allah showed them. So if I mention the names of the ulama who were fooled, I'm not going to mention their name. But Imam Khomeini, God showed him what it was like. So that's just one example. Now, brothers and sisters, let's see if there's another one of Allah's promises that we can cover. Because we have about 6 minutes. Let's see if I can share another one of the Quran examples for you that we learn from the Quran. One of the things that Allah wants us to have is a mentality where we're always waiting for things to work out. I'll call it the one of the two best things mentality. It's from an ayat of Quran. One of the two best things mentality. Right? So, there's one time when you and I go through life and we're afraid of taking on certain responsibilities because we're afraid. Perhaps I'll do my best and it blows up in my face. Right? It leads to doubt. But there's another time when God's on my side, everything I touch, it's going to be one of the good things. Either it will be exactly as I planned, as I wrote it up, or God will have something better for me. Okay, so let's look at this verse of the Quran. So this is going to be now 2 verses of the Quran, and then after that, inshallah, the story. So, Surah 9, brothers and sisters, Surah 9 and verses number 51 and 52. Surah 9, verses number 51 and 52. Okay. So ready? Let's see if I can quote the verse properly. So do you guys see قُلْ لَن يُصِيبَنَا? Do y'all see that? قُلْ لَن يُصِيبَنَا. Do y'all see that, brothers and sisters? Yes? Okay. So say, Allah is telling the Prophet, say, لَن يُصِيبَنَا. Nothing will befall us. لَن يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا. Except that which God has ordained for us. Now again, brothers and sisters, let's look at the Arabic. In the Arabic, it says that what God has written, lana, for us. It's beneficial for us. It's on our side, right? Nothing will befall us, so we might be going to any new situation. Either it goes out exactly the way that I planned, alhamdulillah, or God has another plan. For on the outside, it seems like a disappointment, but it's another, okay? So it says, قُلْ لَن يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا Huwa maulana. God is our master. He is our master. وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. And then only on Allah let the believers rely. Right? Tawakkul, one of the conditions of Iman, only on Allah let the believers rely. The next part of the verse is also interesting. So God says, again continuing. So again, back to your verse, it says, so 9:52. So let's say, because the verse is talking about the idea of going into jihad, right, which is very difficult. Somebody will go into the jihad, either they become shaheed or they overwhelm the enemy. But now the verse of the Quran. So God says over here, it says, قُلْ هَلْ, so if you see the second verse, قُلْ هَلْ تَرَبَّسُونَ بِنَا. So are you waiting for anything to befall us? إِلَّا إِحْدَى الْحُسْنِيَيْنِ. Except one of those two great things. What you'll learn from the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt, which I want to share with you, is the idea that the mu'min goes through life like this. They're always expecting, I'm going to do my part. God will do His. Either it'll go the way that I planned, or on the outside it'll seem like a setback, but in reality, it's me getting ready to experience more of Allah's goodness. So the hadith from Amirul Mu'mineen is like this now. So we've seen the verse of the Quran. Now the mindset of the believer, the hadith of Amirul Mu'mineen is this. Al-mu'min yaqdhan. So the mu'min is alert, awake. The mu'min is intelligent. The mu'min, he says, yantadhiru. The believer awaits Ihdal husniyain, one of the two good things. Right? So it doesn't mean that there's no setbacks. It doesn't mean that there's no things sometimes don't go our way. No, sometimes things don't go our way. As Allah says in the Quran, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Sometimes we want something, we think it's the right thing, it doesn't go our way. They said once, there's a story, inshallah it's not true. They said once there was a little boy, and he was playing baseball in his backyard, and his neighbor's watching. So the little boy took his baseball bat, and he swung as hard as he can. He threw the ball up the air, swung as hard as he can, and he missed. And he said, strike one. But each time he said, but I'm the greatest hitter in the world. Then he threw the ball up again. He swung so hard the little boy fell on the ground. And he missed again. He said, strike through. But he said, but I'm the greatest hitter in the world. Then the little boy threw the ball up again, and he swung with all of his might, and he missed. And then the little boy said, you know what? I'm the greatest strikeout artist in the world. You plan one thing, Allah has something else. So it's not the case that it never works out for the moment. Now, the other part, before I get to the story of Imam Khomeini, is this. Right? Because what happens is that some people, when those difficulties come, they get upset. They get bitter with God. I trusted God. I did my part. It blew up in my face. Now I'm not able to trust in God. Instead of the mindset being ihdal husniyain, these people, they do something else that Imam Ali talks about. He says, man asbaha ala dunya hazina. The person who wakes up and they're upset with Allah's decree. They're upset with the dunya. Faqad asbaha liqada Allah sakhita. The person has woke up, but they're angry at the decree of God. Allah decided. Ihdal husniyain. I thought one way, God had another plan. I had another story that I know is not true, inshallah. They said once this guy, he went out jogging, trying to get himself fit, and then this dog bit him. So he went to the doctor, and the doctor told him, he said, you've got rabies. And the man was so angry, he said, don't worry, you're going to be okay, but you do need a shot. The guy went to get the shot ready, came back, and he saw the guy was writing on a piece of paper. He said, are you writing your will? You're not going to die. It's a rabies shot. The guy said, oh, I'm not writing my will. I made a list of all the people I'm going to bite. So we don't want to be like that. Now, unfortunately, we did run out of time. So that story of Imam Khomeini, we'll have to leave for another day, inshallah. We'll end with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Hassan Shaykhna, another loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Inshallah, just another reminder that tomorrow our program will continue. If you did not RSVP for iftar for tomorrow, please do so. Inshallah, if you haven't RSVP today, you're more than welcome. We inshallah welcome everybody to join us for iftar. We're going to pray. We're going to ask some of the brothers to help with just a few lines of the chairs, not all of the chairs. And then we'll inshallah pray salat. The bathrooms for wudu are open for those who need to perform wudu. And inshallah we'll pray and then we'll break bread together. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود